They called him a monster. They called him a genius. They called him destiny in human form. But before Napoleon Bonaparte became the master of Europe, he was just a small boy on a poor island in the middle of the sea. A boy who looked up at the ships in the harbour and promised himself that one day the world would know his name. Napoleon was born on August 15, 1769, in Ajaccio, Corsica, a place as wild as the wind that blew through its mountains. His family was noble in title, but not in wealth. They had books, pride, and debts. Even the goats were thin. Corsica was poor, and life was a constant negotiation between dignity and hunger. From his earliest years, Napoleon was defiant, stubborn to the point of obsession. When his mother scolded him, he wouldn't cry or beg forgiveness. He would glare silently until she left the room. He later said, "My mother is the only man I ever feared." When he was 9, his father, Carlo Bonaparte, secured a scholarship for him at a French military school. Napoleon left Corsica on a ship with tattered clothes and a heavy accent, mocked by French boys who thought themselves superior. He ate alone, studied late, and lived in a world of maps and dreams. He devoured stories of Alexander the Great, Hannibal and Caesar, men who shaped the earth like sculptors. At night, he whispered to himself that one day he would stand among them. He would not just be remembered, he would be inevitable. By 1785, Napoleon was a young artillery officer, quiet but sharp as flint. France was collapsing under the weight of its monarchy, and revolution was brewing. When the chaos came, most officers froze. Napoleon saw opportunity. At Toulon in 1793, royalists and the British had seized the harbour. The Republic was desperate. Napoleon, then just 24, surveyed the land and said, "I can take it in a week." He arranged cannons on high ground and bombarded the British fleet. The city fell. The young Corsican had saved the revolution. He was promoted on the spot. France had found its sword. But Napoleon was more than a soldier. He was a mathematician, a dreamer, and a master manipulator. He wrote love letters and battle plans with the same feverish passion. He didn't just fight wars. He designed them like equations. He believed that speed was victory, that imagination could conquer hesitation, and that belief would carry him to Italy. In 1796, at just 26, Napoleon took command of the army of Italy, a ragged, starving, barefoot force that hadn't been paid in months. When he arrived, the soldiers looked at him with suspicion. He looked back and said, "Soldiers, you are hungry and naked. The government owes you nothing, but I will lead you to glory and to riches." And he did. In a single campaign, Napoleon crushed 4 Austrian armies, liberated Italy, and filled France with treasure. He didn't just defeat enemies, he humiliated them. He struck where no one expected, marching through impossible terrain, attacking when logic said wait. He once said, "You must not fight too often with one enemy, or you will teach him all your art of war." He fought fast, thought faster, and demanded everything from his men. They followed him like believers following a prophet. They began to call him the Little Corporal, not to mock him, but because he stood among them, sharing their rations, their rain, and their victories. Napoleon was no aristocrat hiding behind etiquette. He was a storm wearing a uniform. By 1798, Napoleon's ambition had outgrown Europe. He wanted to strike at Britain's empire, and to do it by seizing Egypt, the bridge to India. He sold the idea as a military operation, but in truth, it was an expedition of the mind. He brought with him not just soldiers, but 167 scientists, artists, and engineers. He wanted to conquer ancient knowledge itself. It was this expedition that uncovered the Rosetta Stone, unlocking the secrets of hieroglyphs that had been silent for millennia. At the Battle of the Pyramids, Napoleon's army of 25,000 faced 60,000 Mamluk horsemen. He formed his men into great squares, their bayonets like iron forests. When the dust cleared, the desert was silent. He turned to his men and said, "Soldiers, 40 centuries looked down upon you. It was a victory, reshaped, but a poisoned one." His fleet was soon destroyed by Admiral Nelson at the Battle of the Nile, trapping Napoleon in Egypt. His dream of empire turned to sand. Still, he refused to admit defeat. He explored, studied, governed, as if failure was someone else's word. Then, without warning, he left Egypt, abandoned his army, and sailed for France. He arrived a hero. France didn't care how he won, only that he had returned. France in 1799 was broken. Corrupt politicians, collapsing economy, endless wars. Napoleon saw a power vacuum, and power vacuums were oxygen to him. In November, he staged a coup. Soldiers surrounded the government. Politicians shouted, panicked, fainted. Napoleon walked into the chamber and said, "Citizens, you have sat long enough." The Republic was over. He created a new system, the Consulate, and named himself First Consul of France. At 30, he ruled the nation. Unlike most revolutionaries, Napoleon understood that ideals were nothing without order. He reformed taxes, created public schools, rebuilt roads, established the Bank of France, and wrote the Napoleonic Code, a legal system that still underpins much of modern Europe and Latin America. He made chaos efficient. He turned revolution into routine. Napoleon said, "The art of government is not to let men grow tired of you." And for a while, they didn't. By 1804, Napoleon had outgrown the republic he pretended to serve. He called for a ceremony in the great cathedral of Notre Dame. The Pope himself travelled from Rome to crown him. But when the moment came, Napoleon took the crown from the Pope's hands and placed it on his own head. The message was clear: he was the maker of his own destiny. He rebuilt France into a meritocracy, where birth mattered less than talent. Farmers became generals, sergeants became marshals. He rewarded brilliance and punished incompetence. He once said, "Every soldier carries a marshal's baton in his knapsack." It was intoxicating. He expanded his empire across Europe: Spain, Italy, Austria, Prussia. He defeated coalitions, rewrote treaties, and married an Austrian princess to legitimize his dynasty. At his height, Napoleon ruled over 70 million people. Even his enemies admired him. But power, like gravity, always pulls downward. In 1812, Napoleon made the same mistake that crushed so many conquerors before him. He went to war with Russia. He led over 600,000 men, an army larger than any Europe had ever seen. He expected one quick victory, but the Russians retreated, burning everything behind them: cities, crops, bridges. Napoleon chased them deeper into the wasteland. Finally, he reached Moscow. The city was deserted. That night, flames consumed it. Napoleon waited for the Tsar to surrender. No message came. Then came winter. Men froze in their sleep. Horses turned to stone. Food vanished. Discipline collapsed. When the army began its retreat, wolves followed. Out of 600,000 men, barely 100,000 survived. The road from Moscow became a graveyard, stretching across snow and silence. Napoleon refused to wear a coat. He thought suffering less would make his men stronger. It only made him seem untouchable or insane. The Russian campaign shattered the myth. Europe rose against him. By 1814, Napoleon's empire was surrounded. Britain, Austria, Prussia, and Russia invaded from all sides. Even then he fought like a cornered beast, winning battles, losing ground. But his marshals were exhausted, his people starving, and his allies deserting. When Paris fell, Napoleon abdicated. He kissed the tricolour flag and whispered, "Farewell, my children." Then he was sent to Elba, a tiny island off Italy, to rule over 12,000 people and his own humiliation. But exile couldn't contain him. He built roads, schools, and a navy. He studied the horizon every morning, and less than a year later, he escaped. Napoleon landed in France with 1,000 men. The king sent an army to arrest him. When they met, Napoleon rode forward, opened his coat and shouted, "Soldiers, if any of you will shoot your emperor, here I am." No one fired. Instead, they shouted, "Vive l'Empereur!" Within days, Napoleon ruled France again. It was as if Europe's nightmare had woken from its sleep. But this time, his enemies were ready. Every great power in Europe united once more. The world prepared for one final reckoning. June 18, 1815, Waterloo, Belgium. Rain fell through a grey sky as Napoleon surveyed the muddy fields. Across from him stood the Duke of Wellington, calm, cautious, waiting. Napoleon had 72,000 soldiers. Wellington had 68,000 and 50,000 Prussians marching to join. Napoleon delayed, waiting for the ground to dry. Hours that cost him everything. When the cannons finally roared, the world shook. French cavalry charged like thunder. Infantry advanced in perfect rhythm, but the British squares held, tight, unbreakable. Then the Prussians arrived. The French line bent, broke, and vanished into mud and smoke. Napoleon watched his last army dissolve before his eyes. He said quietly, "The English are good soldiers, but they are led by donkeys." Then he turned and rode away. The dream was over. He surrendered to the British, expecting to live out his days in peace. Instead, they sent him to St. Helena, a barren rock in the middle of the Atlantic Ocean, 1,200 miles from anywhere. There, Napoleon lived in a small house called Longwood, surrounded by soldiers who watched his every move. He walked in circles for hours, wrote his memoirs, and dictated his life as he wanted it remembered. He studied his own downfall like a battle lost on paper. He told one of his guards, "There is no immortality but the memory that is left in the minds of men." He died in 1821, aged 51. Some said stomach cancer, others whispered poison. When his body was returned to France years later, it was found astonishingly preserved, as if even death had hesitated to touch him. Today, beneath the golden dome of Les Invalides in Paris, he rests inside 6 nested coffins, each made of a different material: granite, mahogany, lead, ebony, layers of protection, as if he still fears the world might reach him. Napoleon reshaped civilization. He changed how nations fight, how governments rule, how men dream of greatness. He built an empire out of mathematics and willpower. He made order out of chaos, and then drowned in it. He was both liberator and tyrant, hero and villain. He destroyed Europe, but he also built it anew. He left behind schools, laws, borders, and myths. To this day, more streets, statues, and cities bear his name than any other leader in history. He once said, "Death is nothing but to live defeated and inglorious is to die every day." Perhaps that's why he could never rest, not even in exile. Because for Napoleon Bonaparte, glory was not a choice. It was a heartbeat. And when it stopped, the world held its breath. Glory is fleeting, but obscurity is forever. Watch the next chapter, Napoleon's Mind. The genius, politics, and tactics behind an empire. To see how one man's strategy reshaped war, politics, and the very idea of power.